One of the most common questions I get asked by new students, people in the comments on my performance videos, audience members at gigs, is what mouthpiece do I use? So today, let's answer that once and for all and go over why you really don't want this mouthpiece. You see, while mouthpieces are the most influential part of the saxophone when it comes to the tone we produce, there's something even more important than that. Us. No two saxophonists sound the same. Sometimes it's huge differences, like Paul Desmond versus Cannonball Adderley. And sometimes it's a more subtle difference, like Phil Woods versus Cannonball Adderley. And the reason that even two saxophonists that are using the exact same setup still sound different, well, it can't be the gear if they're using the same stuff, right? It's the fact their mouths are a different shape and size, their natural tongue position's going to be different, they might use a looser or a tighter embouchure, and their embouchure muscles are going to be slightly different. All normal biological stuff, but it gives each of us a unique tone, and this stuff is way more important than what mouthpiece you're using. Now, when we first try a different mouthpiece, it can seem like it's drastically transformed our sound, and we sound nothing like we used to. And because of that, it can seem like the mouthpiece is way more important than we are. But the reason for such a drastic change is that we haven't adjusted to the new mouthpiece yet. We're still playing it like we played the old one. And once we have adjusted, which usually happens naturally and subconsciously over a few days, we start to sound a lot more like we used to. And to prove what I'm talking about, here's me playing with my normal mouthpiece and then playing the exact same thing with a different one, once as soon as I switched and a second time after a week of practice. Did you notice that after a week of practice, my tone was a lot closer to how it normally sounds? Fine, it was still a little bit different because I was using a different mouthpiece, but it was far less drastic of a change than when I first did the switch. Now, just because we are so much more important than the gear doesn't mean we're stuck with our natural tone with no way to improve it. If I still sounded like I did when I first started, I wouldn't have a career. Long tones, overtones, mouthpiece exercises, transcription, all of this stuff is still going to massively improve your tone, and so will spending loads of time with just one mouthpiece, so you're not having to constantly adjust to new gear, and you can really get used to getting the best possible tone from it. And if you look at the greats, most of them stuck with the same gear for a very long time. Cannonball Adderley played on a Meyer for his whole career. Joe Henderson played on a Selmer Soloist for his whole career. Dexter Gordon played on an Otto Link in the 40s, which was then stolen in the 50s. Then he played on a Jukoff until that was stolen in the 60s. And then he went back to an Otto Link, which he played on for the rest of his career. In fact, Dexter Gordon said back in 1962, "I kind of feel sorry for guys that constantly go through the mouthpiece and reed scene. I wonder how they do it. It must be a real panic scene. Naturally, the mouthpiece, the reed, and the horn you use are all very essential, but basically your tone, your sound, is inside of you. You hear it before you produce it. The real ingredient of the sound is within the individual, the way he hears things." And I do sometimes think this is a bit of a problem with YouTube. There are so many mouthpiece and saxophone reviews out there, all done by musicians that have already got a killer tone. And it can kind of make this impression that we need to keep buying the newest and shiniest gear to get the best possible sound. And I get it, those videos do well, they make good advertising money for the content creator, they're somewhat helpful if you're interested in that equipment and you're not able to get to a shop to try it out yourself. But still, it gives the wrong idea that we can spend money to improve our tone. And it all comes from work, man. Now, all of this doesn't mean there's never any reason to change mouthpiece. And I'd be lying if I said I'd only used one my entire career. I've actually used 3. But there does need to be an actual reason for you changing any part of your gear, wanting something brighter, darker, better intonation, whatever. My first tenor mouthpiece was a metal Otto Link, but at the time I was mainly playing alto and I found it really hard to adjust to the different shape of a metal mouthpiece. So after a bit of time, I switched from that to an Otto Link Tone Edge. Similar sound profile, but so much more comfortable in my mouth. And I must have played this for 5 or 6 years, all the way through music college and into the start of my career, and I loved the sound I got from this. Rich, warm, dark, everything I wanted from a jazz sound. But as I started doing more and more pop gigs, it just didn't cut through the mix. It was okay if there was a sound technician that could do some live EQ, but most of the time on the gigs that I was doing, that wasn't an option. And there's only so many times you can do a gig and barely get heard. So after exploring a few options for Otto Link vibe, but a little bit brighter, I came across what I use now, a Theowani Slant Sig. Now I can get a rich, warm, vibrant jazz sound, but I can also, if I push it, get that bright sound to cut through the mix on a pop gig. Everything that I personally need as a musician. So let's say that, like me, you play a mix of straight-ahead jazz gigs and pop gigs, and you want a sound that's on the darker end of the spectrum, but when you push it can still be bright enough to cut through on a pop gig. Well, why shouldn't you get the same mouthpiece as me? Well, the thing is, mouthpieces are really complex. Everything to do with their internal shape, the baffle, the chamber, the tip rails, it all contributes to that mouthpiece's sound. And you want one that works with you and your own personal sound. So just picking up the same one that works for me doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get anywhere near the same tone. Work out what you want from a mouthpiece and if you even need a new one at all. And if you do, try a few different ones out, but once you've settled on one, just put in the work to improve your tone yourself. You're going to end up with such a better sound and potentially you'll save yourself quite a lot of money.